Some battles you win the moment you step out of your own mind.
There was a time I believed that silence made you small, that a real man should always speak louder, strike faster, and never be the one left without the last word. And for a while, I lived that way. Until one afternoon, in a boardroom wrapped in tailored suits and cold smiles, I sat across from a man named Victor. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult me outright. He simply knew how to make every word cut just enough to sting. The kind of comments that make your chest tighten, not from pain, but from pride. I could feel my jaw clench, my fingers curled beneath the table, and a voice in my head whispered, "Say something, push back, show them you're not weak." But just as I was about to speak, I saw Kai's eyes in my mind, not in front of me, but clear as day, steady, silent, still. His gaze held no judgment, only a quiet reminder. Not every wind deserves your sail. So I stayed silent, not out of fear, but because something inside me understood. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. And to my surprise, that silence didn't shrink me. It freed me. Because the truth is, no one can pull you into a storm unless you step off your own ship. Victor kept talking, but his words had nowhere to land. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A calm that didn't come from winning, but from no longer needing to. That was the day I realized peace isn't what happens when everyone else quiets down. It's what happens when you no longer need the noise. Kai once asked me, "When the storm hits, are you the boat or are you the ocean?" At the time, I laughed. It sounded like one of those cryptic lines from an old philosophy book. But Kai didn't laugh. He just looked at me, gently, and said, "Hold the wheel." It took me years to understand. Anger is just a wave. You are the sea. If you chase the wave, you tip over. But if you stay still, the wave passes. That's not just poetry. It's how people lose themselves. Not because life gets stormy, but because they forget they're bigger than the storm. The wind can scream, the rain can pound, but none of that defines the ocean. Only the ocean decides when to stay calm and when to rise. Here's the question that quietly stings. When you react, are you protecting yourself or proving that you can be moved? Most of us get it backwards. We think snapping back protects our pride. We think biting back makes us strong. But truth is, we just handed over the wheel to whoever knows how to push our buttons. If someone can provoke you, they already control you. How many times have you let someone else steer your mood? A stranger cuts you off, and you carry the tension into dinner. Someone drops a cheap shot under your post, and it lives rent-free in your head for hours. You gave away your peace to someone who never even asked for it. Here's the image I wish I had learned sooner. Every time you take the bait, it's like handing the keys to your house to a thief, and then acting surprised when the furniture is gone. That's what anger does. It lets people rearrange your mind without your permission. Remember this: not every wave deserves your boat. Not every voice deserves your reply. Not every insult deserves your attention. Stay on course. Ever had an entire argument in your head, long after the moment passed? Lost hours, maybe days, just replaying what you should have said? That's the quiet tax of anger. It steals your focus. It drains your sleep. And it robs your presence from the people who matter most. I wish I could tell you I mastered this from the start. But there was a day I forgot everything Kai taught me. And on that day, I didn't just lose my temper. I lost something I had spent years building. So before this video ends, write down 3 things that most often pull you out of peace. Do it tonight. Because sometimes the storm doesn't come from outside. It comes from your own hands, the same hands that were meant to steer your ship. And all of it happened because I thought I was the boat. In the next chapter, you'll see what happens when you mistake a single wave for the entire ocean, and why that mistake nearly cost me everything. There was a deal on the table, not just a contract, a lifeline, something that could breathe life back into everything I'd built, after years of watching it slowly fade. People love to call it a comeback, but for me, it wasn't about pride. It was about purpose. One more chance to restore what still mattered. Before I walked into that boardroom, Kai said quietly, "If they provoke you, don't react. Drop anchor. Hold." Simple words. Easy to remember. But sometimes, the advice that saves you is the advice you think you've outgrown. Hold the wheel. At first, the meeting flowed. Numbers made sense. Terms aligned. There was even laughter in the room. And then he leaned back. The one I'll call Mason. Arms folded, smile thin, eyes scanning for weakness. It wasn't about business anymore. It was about me. Some people don't want to beat you. They want to watch you lose yourself. He started talking about my past, the failure, the bankruptcy, the people who left when things got quiet. Every word wasn't a question. It was a match. And he was looking for gasoline. That's the thing about anger. It shows up in your body before it announces itself. Your shoulders tighten. Your breath shortens. Your mind rehearses what it'll say next. Not to solve, but to sting. And then, in a flash, you feel your hands reaching for the wheel, knowing full well you're about to steer straight into the rocks. But you do it anyway. Are you letting the need to hit back feel more important than the need to win? I stood up, voice sharp, tone cold, words crafted to pierce. But cutting doesn't just wound others. It bleeds from within, too. And I let it happen, like tossing my own compass into the sea, and wondering why I couldn't find my way back. In less than 5 minutes, years of work unraveled. The deal didn't fall apart. I tore it apart. And worse, the ripples didn't stay in that room. Gossip moves faster than facts. By the end of the week, investors had heard a version of me that wasn't true. But it didn't matter. Reputation often travels farther than truth ever gets the chance to. When I told Kai what happened, he didn't scold me. He simply said, "1 minute of steering in anger can sink a ship built over years." And in that moment, I saw it clearly. Mason didn't ruin the deal. I did. So I'll ask you, who have you handed your wheel to lately? Because most storms in life aren't sent to destroy us. They come to ask one question: have you really learned to sail? That day, I failed. Not just in business, but in the quiet test of my own growth. And what I didn't know yet was that the next storm wouldn't just test my temper. It would ask me what I was truly willing to let go of, to become who I said I wanted to be. We like to think storms come from the outside, from people, from problems, from timing gone wrong. But more often than not, the storm is tied to us by strings we don't even know we're carrying. One evening, Kai said to me, "Every rope on your deck can hold you, or drown you. Cut what you can't control." At the time, I didn't get it, but life has a way of teaching you slowly and then all at once. For me, those ropes were attachments, subtle, personal, invisible. I was tied to approval, and one disapproving glance could leave me spiraling. I was tied to being right, and one disagreement could throw me off course. I was tied to certain people, and their absence hurt more than the worst waves ever did. Here's what makes it dangerous. You don't see the rope until someone tugs on it. That's why some words hurt more than others. That's why certain losses keep you up at night, while others disappear by morning like they never mattered. Have you noticed how one careless comment from a family member can ruin your entire weekend, while a stranger saying the same thing barely stings, or how one friend leaving your message on read feels like a betrayal, but another disappearing for months doesn't even rattle you? It's not about them. It's about the string. In that deal with Mason, he didn't stumble into a weakness. He found the rope I had buried under pride and silence. The rope tied to my need to prove I had come back. To show the world, and maybe myself, that I was no longer the man who had failed. And once he tugged that rope, the whole ship tilted toward him. I remember the exact moment. It felt like being a puppet in my own body, watching someone else pull the string that made my voice rise, while I stood there, aware of what was happening, but unable to stop it. If your peace depends on someone else's reaction, they own your weather. If your worth depends on being right, every disagreement becomes a storm. Cutting those strings doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop surrendering your direction to hands that don't belong at your wheel. The real work was never about clever comebacks. It was about learning to sail with fewer ropes, lighter, freer, harder to pull off course. And yet, even after I saw the ropes, even after I cut some of them, there was still one I refused to touch. One I told myself was harmless, safe, necessary even. I was wrong. Because one day, that rope didn't just pull, it yanked the compass right out of my hands and nearly sank me in clear weather. So if you think you already know what your deepest attachment is, hold that thought. Because next, I'll show you how to cut the rope without shedding blood, and why letting it go might feel like losing everything, before you realize it was the first moment of getting yourself back. Your attention is your compass. Where you point it is where your life quietly begins to drift. If you fix your gaze on the lighthouse, you'll find the shore. But if you scatter it across every shouting voice, every uninvited opinion, you may wake up one day, lost at sea, wondering when you veered off course. I didn't always see it that way. In my early years, I spent entire days caught in arguments that had nothing to do with my future. Emails that should have taken 2 minutes turned into hours-long battles for the last word. One sarcastic jab from a competitor? It could hijack my whole week. Most storms don't sink your ship. They steal your focus, and then let you do the rest. When Mason provoked me, he wasn't just pulling some emotional rope, he was slowly turning my wheel. And the worst part? I handed it to him, quietly, willingly. Kai once told me, "Attention is currency. Spend it on storms, and you'll go broke before you even leave the harbor. Spend it on the wrong person, and you don't just lose time, you lose peace, presence, sometimes even purpose." I remember one morning, a message popped up on my phone. Not urgent, not important. But I opened it anyway. One reply turned into 2, then 4, then a full day of spiraling thoughts over something that wasn't even mine to carry. By midnight, I was still awake. Not from pressure, but from regret. It felt like standing in my own workshop, hands carved deep into a beautiful piece of wood, and then, mid-process, tossing it into the fire. Gone. Have you ever had a day like that? Where the first 10 minutes, one message, One headline, one careless comment, derailed everything you were meant to build. That's how attention works. Not with a scream, but with a whisper. Kai once told me, "What you look at is where you sail." And a man staring at storms should never be surprised when he ends up in one. So I started keeping a quiet ledger, a personal inventory of my attention. Every reply, every reaction, every argument became a line item. And before I spent another ounce of energy, I asked myself 3 questions. Is this truly worth my time? Will this change anything? Does this keep me on course? Most things failed the test, and every time I ignored what didn't deserve me, I felt lighter, like throwing unnecessary cargo overboard. Guarding your attention isn't about silence. It's about choosing peace with precision. Sometimes that means holding the sword and not swinging it. Sometimes it means walking away from the chessboard while your opponent sits, waiting for a move. That will never come. I didn't understand how powerful that was until the day I stood face to face with the man who had betrayed me. Every part of me wanted to sink him with one sentence. Just one. But I paused. 3 questions. 1 breath. And then, the choice. To leave that room in pieces, or to leave it in peace. I stood face to face with the man who had betrayed me, the same man whose choices had reduced years of my work to ashes. It was just the 2 of us now. No noise, no audience, only a table between us, and a storm that had long passed, but never truly settled. I had the words, the facts, the receipts. I knew what to say that would ruin him completely. 1 sentence, and I could have sunk him. No comeback, no recovery, just silence, on his side. The temptation rose like a tidal wave. My mind played the scene in slow motion, his expression, the shift in the air, the moment he'd realize I knew too much. And part of me thought that would feel like closure, like justice. It felt like standing in a dojo, knowing the exact strike that would end the match, and choosing not to move. Then Kai's voice cut through my thoughts, not loud, but undeniable. The sharpest sword is the one still sheathed, when the opponent expects it drawn. I stayed silent, not because I had forgiven him, not because I was afraid, but because I understood something that took me years to learn. Revenge doesn't close the wound. It keeps you bleeding. It doesn't end the fight. It pulls you deeper into it. Silence isn't weakness. It's restraint. It leaves the other person swinging at air, forced to hear the echo of their own imbalance. And imbalance has a way of teaching what no punishment ever could. You've felt it, haven't you? When someone lashes out, expecting you to bite back, but instead, you offer nothing. And suddenly, their words have no wall to bounce off of, just silence. And in that silence, they hear themselves more clearly than ever before. Kai once told me, "The deadliest strike is the one you know, but never throw." I've carried that truth into everyday life. At work, when someone tries to bait me in a meeting. At home, when a sharp remark is tossed out just to see if I'll flinch. Sometimes, the most powerful move is not moving at all. That day, in that room, I didn't just walk away from the man who wronged me. I walked into a version of myself that no longer needed to win battles to prove I was strong. Silence is not the absence of power. It's power, concentrated and withheld. It's knowing you could destroy, and choosing instead to rebuild. Yourself. The world will tell you that strength is about speaking louder, hitting harder, never being ignored. But there's another kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need to be seen to be felt. That day, I walked away, not to spare him, but to protect my peace. And that was the real victory, proving to myself that I could win, without swinging. 1 year later, he came back, not for forgiveness, for survival. The storm had returned, but this time, it was asking a different question. And in the next chapter, you'll face the test that decides whether you truly hold the wheel or still hand it over in disguise. A year had passed. I thought I'd moved on. At least, that's what I told myself. And then, he returned. The same man who had once burned years of my life to the ground, now sat across from me again. But this time, there was no fire in his eyes, only fatigue. He didn't come for forgiveness. He came for survival. His company was collapsing, and with it, jobs, families, futures. Revenge whispered, "Let him drown." Pride added, "This is your moment. Watch him beg." And for a brief second, both voices felt justified. But then, everything slowed. I saw my own hand on the wheel, 2 directions pulling, and beneath them, a quieter current began to rise. Kai's voice returned. Mastery is when old wounds no longer choose your direction. I sat in silence. The kind of silence where you don't just hear the other person, you hear yourself, your compass, asking better questions. If I say no, am I protecting peace or protecting pride? If I say yes, am I betraying my healing or proving it? Helping him didn't mean restoring trust. It meant reclaiming who I wanted to be in this new storm. So I said yes, not for him, for me, to confirm the wheel was still in my hands. But I didn't walk in blind. I walked in with 5 conditions, like laying new ground before you rebuild the house. Boundaries in writing. No emergencies, no manipulation. Full transparency. Numbers open, no blind spots. People first, jobs protected, exits handled with dignity. No rewriting history. Fix the damage, don't paint over it. Principles over pride, alignment before ego. He agreed. Then came the real work. Hard conversations, ruthless prioritizing, cutting vanity projects, the ones that looked good on paper but bled the business dry. Training managers to lead with clarity, calling every supplier with honesty, not desperation, not begging, not posturing, just truth. It felt like sitting across a chessboard from an old rival. You know their moves, but this time you're playing your own game. One night, I stood alone in his warehouse, cold floor, machines asleep, memories stirring. I remembered the fire that once took my own life down, and for a brief moment, that same anger rose, a ghost tapping my shoulder. But I didn't answer it. I watched it come, and then watched it pass. I wasn't the boat anymore. I was the sea. Let me ask you this. Have you noticed how the real test often shows up dressed like the old wound, but asks a new question? Not can you win, but can you lead without letting the past captain your present? Weeks later, the company didn't look heroic, but it looked stable. The lights were on, people still had work on Monday, and sometimes that's what mastery looks like. Not a parade, but a quiet dock that still stands, after the waves. When it was done, he thanked me. I nodded. We weren't friends again, just 2 people who had learned something in the same wind. As I stepped out into the night, my phone rang. It was Kai. "How did the sea treat you today?" I smiled. It tried to pull me back into old waters, but I held the wheel. He was quiet for a breath, then said, "Good. Now you're ready for the only freedom that lasts, the kind that doesn't depend on a title, or a company, or a version of you others believe in. Freedom that doesn't need applause, doesn't need revenge, doesn't need anything to stay afloat. Because real freedom was never the finale. It was always the starting line.
Winter by the river. The air was so sharp, each breath felt earned. No house, no company, no identity left to protect. Just my boots, my breath, and the sound of water insisting its way forward. Kai sat beside me, tore a simple loaf in half, and handed me a piece. "This was once all I had," he said, with a softness that could split stone, "and it was the best thing I ever ate." Something in me loosened, not just my shoulders, something older, like I'd been breathing through a straw for years, and someone had finally handed me the whole sky. I used to think freedom came after the finish line, after victory, after applause, but standing there, with nothing left to prove, I realized the storm hadn't stopped. It had simply lost me. We carry ropes we don't see, titles, possessions, stories we whisper to ourselves about who we have to be. We call it identity. But when the river rises, those ropes turn to anchors. Kai once said, "Most people try to calm the river, but the wise, they lighten the boat." So I started cutting. Approval, because peace that needs permission was never peace at all. Being right, because you can win an argument and lose a whole year. Image, because polishing the mask can cost you the face beneath it. Each cut felt terrifying, like losing ground. But then I noticed something. I was moving again. Insults only work when pride listens. Manipulation only lands when fear answers. Take those away, and the storm collapses on itself. That winter, I built a different kind of wealth. Mornings that belonged to me. Work I could sign with a full heart. Friendships that weren't transactions. A silence that meant space, not emptiness. One evening, I walked the river alone. Same cold, same water, but not the same man. The world still had opinions, hooks still dangled, but there was more sky inside me now. The day you have nothing left to lose is the day you stop fighting to survive and start sailing to discover. You stop bargaining with the waves. You start riding them. Kai's voice broke the quiet behind me. "What do you see?" I didn't even hesitate. "Open water," I said, "and wind at my back." He nodded. "Good. Now go where the wind proves who you are." Closing compass. The captain's map. Cut the ropes you can't control. Peace tied to someone else's hand will always drift. Guard your attention like treasure. Storms begin by stealing focus, not your ship. Let silence strike where words would waste. Power often lives in what you withhold. Lead without letting the past steer. Mastery begins when your wounds no longer choose your course. Lighten the boat before calming the river. Anchors disguised as identity will sink you. Build boundaries on calm days, so you don't have to shout them in storms. Sail for discovery, not survival. Freedom isn't calm seas. It's carrying steadiness into any weather. That winter, there was only one person who ever found me by the river. Elena. She didn't say much, just sat beside me, offered warm tea from a chipped flask, and looked at the water like it carried the same weight she did. No fixing, no questions, just presence. At one point she said, "You don't have to rebuild everything, just what still feels true." Then she left, not away, just onward. And I realized, some people aren't meant to stay in the boat. They're the wind that helps you lift the sail again. You see, walking away from a battle doesn't make you weak. It means you've learned which wars are worth your soul. Every time I chose peace over pride, I didn't lose ground. I built it. And the strange thing is, when you stop fighting storms that aren't yours, you begin to hear the wind that's been trying to guide you all along. But here's the truth most people never realize. Freedom isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. Because once the ropes are cut, once the boat is light, the sea won't test you with the storms you already know. It will invite you toward horizons you've never dared to sail. So let me ask you, if tomorrow was that horizon, would you have the courage to leave the shore? I've stood on that edge. The night sky, endless. A single lighthouse blinking in the distance. And the water whispering, "Come and see." If something inside you stirred today, not in fear, but in recognition, then don't just carry that feeling into the noise of life. Stay, because where we're heading next isn't louder, it's deeper. And the strength you'll find there is the kind no storm can touch.
And if this journey spoke to something in you, subscribe not for me, but for the part of you that's finally ready to keep sailing.
The greatest battles are inside you. Win there, and no storm can touch you.